Hey, it's Chris Schmidt with the Average Joe Sports Show. It's Nebraska-Illinois, two ranked teams under the lights.
I'm Gary Sharp, that freshman quarterback for Nebraska. How will he get rattled by Illinois' defense?
Hi, it's Bill Doleman. It's the 400th consecutive sellout at Memorial Stadium coming up on Friday night, and we got 400 Memorial Stadium memories for you.
It's Elijah Herbel here. We'll also lock in our predictions for the weekend. Yes, Nebraska-Illinois, but we'll also discuss Michigan-USC and Tennessee-Oklahoma. That's on the Average Joe Sports Show.
Welcome to it. It's the Average Joe Sports Show, episode 55. We invite you to subscribe and like on YouTube and give us a follow on Twitter, the AJ Sports Pod. That's Bill Doleman, Gary Sharp, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt, Spotify, iTunes. We have One Eye Wondering on volleyball as we record Wednesday night. And then, oh yeah, fellas, Sharpie football on Friday.
Yeah, how about that? Remember when we had all this angst about a Friday night football game and how it was going to ruin the Nebraska football experience? This is the matchup of, hey, look at us. Who would have thought this? For the first time since '85, Nebraska and Illinois are ranked and they're playing in a game.
Well, let's add to it. Like, I've been saying it this week on Hail Varsity Radio that, like, this Friday night thing has actually really grown on me because I'm having people over on Saturday. We're smoking up meats. We're drinking beers. We're watching football. I can't ever do that. My Saturdays, 12 of them every single fall, are always booked up completely. Where it's just like, hey, so are you doing something on Saturday? I'm out hard and fast. I can't do it. I'm working. I finally have a fall Saturday to sit down on my couch, watch college football, be a sloth all day. It's going to be the best. Like it reminds me of my days back in high school.
Now, aren't they playing some high school game or at least one or two at Memorial Stadium on Saturday?
Fremont, Columbus.
Yeah, I think that'd be a cool idea. If you got the Friday night game in Lincoln and then Saturday, do your best to get that place cleaned up overnight, and then just kick off at like 9 and play 4 games on a Saturday at Memorial Stadium. I think that'd be a great idea. If you got a
triple header.
If you got your electronic ticket from the Husker game, come on back and watch some high school football the next day. Yeah, but yeah, I'm like you. Look, it's part of our culture now. I remember when it first came out, you're going to play, Friday night, and it's sacred and all that. It's out the window, just like everything else in college sports these days. So why not embrace it?
Well, what would be really cool if that Saturday game, if we're talking high school football, let's get top team in Nebraska. Let's bring the top team from Illinois in. Let's have them play on a Saturday at Memorial Stadium. I'd go watch that. That'd be a lot of fun.
All right.
Who is the top team? We got the Catholic League in Chicago. You got Rockford.
You might have like a Naperville team. Pat Fitzgerald's son, I think, is on the top team in Chicago. He's a quarterback that's going to Iowa.
As we look through it, some of the top teams in Illinois, this according to Max Preps, East St. Louis. You have Chicago, Mount Carmel.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Nate Turner.
From Frankfort, Illinois, Lincoln Way East.
Chicagoland.
St. Francis from Wheaton. And then rounding out the top 5, you have Loyola Academy in Wilmette.
Okay. Well, Carmel, Nate Turner, and Donovan McNabb, right?
Well, East St. Louis used to be pretty productive to Nebraska. Lorenzo Brinkley was from East St. Louis.
Vernon Powell, I think, might have been a St. Louis guy, not East St. Louis. But
wasn't there Luther Harden?
Yeah, I get to see Luther a couple times a year. He comes to some Friday shows because he lives in Omaha.
That's awesome. Just remember about East St. Louis. Just remember National Lampoon's Vacation.
I know. Hey, Holmes, what's up? Roll them up. Yo, Elijah.
This is the Average Joe Sports Show, Illinois High School Football Edition.
You've seen the original Vacation, haven't you?
Yeah, I have.
Right.
Yeah.
So when they're ripping the hubcaps off and Clark's talking with Ellen and the pimp says, "What do I look like? Christopher Columbo?"
Is that in Chicago?
They just don't make movies like that anymore.
They don't. No, they don't. What kind of movie are we going to watch Friday night? Are you guys geeked up, excited, tight ball game, comfortable ball game, monsoon with lightning delays. What's going to happen Friday?
Well, wait a minute. Al Roker over there, isn't it going to be like 85 at kickoff and won't rain until after the game?
I've been looking into
heard
this.
that.
I've been looking into this all week long. It's as it stands right now, the weather that is forecasted, and by weather I'm referring to rain, keeps on moving further and further back in the weekend. It's a cold front that's moving through that should be slowed down by the warm front, and now we're looking at potential chance for rain late Friday into Saturday morning, but the real heavy stuff won't be coming until Saturday night. So Nebraska seems to have lucked out there because I don't think a rainy game with how well Illinois generates takeaways bodes all that well for Nebraska. That really turns it into a rock fight, and I don't think you want to face a Bielema team in a true rock fight, especially with how well, as I said, their defense takes the ball away. But it looks like, as of right now, knock on some wood, the rain may be staying away until Saturday afternoon.
All right. I think what it'll be doing is raining a lot of feel-good vibes for Nebraska. Okay. I think we've gotten closer to this game. The line to me is right. Illinois is really good defensively. They are good. They have a good cornerback. They have a good safety. If you make a mistake throwing the football, they'll pick it off. So that's where they're good, but they're not like the 22 team that was really good with the front seven or on the offensive line, and there is no Chase Brown. I think they run it okay. They don't really stop the run that well. And Altmaier's done a great job, and he's made strides compared to last year, there's no doubt, at quarterback. And he protects the football, which is most important, and they as a team protect the football. But Altmaier, 70% of his passing yards came against Eastern Illinois and Central Michigan. He had no touchdown passes against KU. So I'm trying not to get caught up in, oh my gosh, there's a number next to Illinois' name. I think it's a little bit by default. You could even make the case if you wanted to against Nebraska, and I would listen. But I think Nebraska is at home, short week, first road game for Illinois, night game, ability to stop the run. I know we'll get into the other side of the ball with a freshman quarterback against that defensive backfield. I just think the line is right, and I think Nebraska for the fourth straight game covers.
Well, let me ask the question to you guys, based on what we saw, and I didn't get a chance to watch the Illinois-Kansas game live, but I've caught it back on replay and in highlights. What was the more impressive win, do you think? Was it Nebraska over Colorado, or was it Illinois over Kansas? Because I think if you would ask that question preseason, a lot of people would say Illinois over Kansas, but Kansas hasn't quite looked like themselves, and the way in which Nebraska beat Colorado is impressive. So Schmidt's giving me the timeout, so I think I'll turn it to you.
No, that's a great question. I still think beating Kansas that came in is they were ranked. KU was a pick by some for a playoff spot to win the Big 12. I think that's K-State or Utah. But right now, KU's a 1-2 football team. I think UNLV is going to challenge for a playoff spot. They're better. They're good. So KU let Illinois possibly beat them twice. And then Illinois is not shabby. I got a nod to Illinois, to be honest, the win over KU, just because I don't think Colorado's going to even go bowling.
Well, the one thing I'll say, though, is Kansas, their offense, new offensive coordinator this year, has been a shadow of what it was previously. That is not the same offense. Daniels has really struggled to pick it up this year. He already has more interceptions this year than he had in the entirety of the 2022 season. Like,
he's not playing.
He's not playing great ball. I think he's been struggling with the offensive scheme that they have in Kansas. That offense in particular for Kansas has been really, really clunky to start the year. Maybe they pick it up, and maybe that win becomes more impressive later down the road. But I'm not to discredit Illinois. I put it about the same tier as that Colorado win for Nebraska, and that it's a team that has good players. Kansas has one of the best defensive backs in the country in Kobe Bryant. Like, they have talent on that roster, but I don't think that win, to me right now, is what I thought it was going to be if Illinois got it done preseason.
Yeah, KU misses their OC.
Yeah.
James Franklin stealing KU's OC has had a huge impact. I mean, Jalen Daniels is at 50%. We would have not thought that coming into the year. But we've reached the point of the season, and I'm glad that Big Ten play is here. We have reached the point of the season of how good was that win, or how good is that team? I mean, that just happens in this sport. And I think that's why Rule talks about the preseason is over. Okay, now you start keeping the stats, and you get into conference play, and you can judge a team a little bit better. But I still think Nebraska's a good football team. They haven't put themselves in a difficult position in 3 weeks. They haven't trailed. They've covered the spread. And they still probably on one side of the ball have shown you very little of what they can do.
I think if you take a look at one specific stretch of play that will have an impact on Friday's game, and that's Northern Iowa's 10-minute drive on Nebraska's defense. I think going into Northern Iowa, is there going to be some type of letdown? Dylan Raiola played pretty well. Will he have maybe a freshman game there? Even though it's Northern Iowa, played as efficiently in Game 3 as he did in 1 and 2. But to see what Northern Iowa did on that opening drive and take it to Nebraska's defense, it only ended up in 3 points, right? But to see them do what they wanted to do and hold the ball and keep that defense on there. And this was a game when everybody's thinking, well, when will the third unit get in there? When will the fourth unit get in there? When will Gary's human victory cigar get into the ball game? And I think that 10-minute drive, and Matt Rule said it in the press conference on Monday, our defense was physically and mentally ready to play, but not emotionally. And that was evident on that drive. So I think you're going to see a defense on the field on Friday that is going to atone for that and get back to the way they played against Colorado, because that's when they really look like they're having fun. And it is not that they're playing at some superhuman level and it's an effort that they've got to put forth all the time. I think that's the Colorado game is them. And I think that 10-minute stretch is something that defense probably went in on Sunday and went, oh, we can't let that happen again. And I watched the KU Illinois game, and in the second half, it really seemed like Illinois was ready to be put away. Their defense looked tired. Daniels threw an interception, and the defense made a couple of plays and stops on fourth down. Their point production was benefited by a pick six at the end of the first half. I mean, and that would seem like when KU might have the momentum, just down the ball and go into the locker room at halftime, but they throw a pick six, and all of a sudden the game completely changes. But I'm looking at how did Kansas lose that game? So I think Nebraska's defense comes in emotionally ready to play, and I think that bodes problems for that Illinois front, and I think Altmaier is going to be running around a lot. He's got two good receivers in Franklin and is it Bryant? Yep. That are very problematic, but I think that defense is going to put the pressure on Illinois, and they have not seen that against Eastern Illinois, Central Michigan, and Kansas.
Well, one thing to note here, Illinois only had one offensive touchdown against Kansas. And Kansas, I think, has a good, not great defense. As I told you, I think they have some good players. Kobe Bryant, fantastic cornerback. I love watching him play for the Jayhawks. But only one offensive touchdown for the Illini in that football game. And I think they have a better defense in Nebraska that they're facing on Friday night. Mm-hmm. Am I crazy there?
No, you're totally fair with all of that. And the thing that I'm interested in, and I wonder if we get it Friday night or it's later on in the season, run game, can Nebraska run when they have to, run when they want to, whether or not permitting? How does your right guard that's earned the starting spot and is still your starter hold up? And then the last question I have is, quite honestly, what's your pucker factor like? If it's a tie ball game, you trail, or you're hanging on to a lead, because we know that that's one hurdle yet to be scaled by Nebraska. And maybe it's Friday night, Sharpie.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question of this team has not been put in attention convention, and how do they respond? We're all kind of waiting for that, and that moment's going to come. When does it exactly come? I think they're built because they're prepared. Like, if they get beat on Friday night, I don't think it's because of themselves. I think we're getting close to getting over that hump. I think it's because Illinois made more plays. But again, I think they're in a good spot because they're a mature team that doesn't ride the EKG. They haven't, and it's easy to be way up when you've won 3 games and you've never trailed, but they don't like the head coach doesn't go high or low. He just kind of straight across the board. And it seems like every player is like that. So when you get a game like this where there's going to be a ton of emotion, okay, you're playing at home. It's going to be a Friday night. The place is going to be packed. It's going to be going nuts. First road game of the year for Illinois. You're rolling at home. You feed off the crowd. I just think there's a lot of advantages that weigh in the factor of Nebraska being ready. But you bring up a good point, Schmidt, that we'll wait and see. What happens when Dylan has a bad series or another bad series or they fall behind? Like if they're behind 10 points, 2 touchdowns, what do? How do they react? That's when we find out really what this team's DNA is.
And I wouldn't be surprised to see this game to be lower scoring because of something you laid out. It's Raiola's first real test against a defense that I think will well and truly stress him with what they're doing, coverages on the back end. Nebraska's going to need to have a rushing attack to make things easier. But to flip it around, Illinois is a team that, what is their identity? They love to pound the rock. They run downhill. And that's true. Illinois is going to run the football. But, again, to go back to the Kansas game, which has been their only real test this year, 34 rushing attempts for 79 yards, 2.3 yards per rush. They never abandoned it, to be fair, because their offense is set up in a way the run sets up the pass, regardless if the run is successful or not. Defenses have to be ready for it. But this is not the vaunted rushing attack that we remember from Bielema's teams at Wisconsin or with Chase Brown at Illinois 2 years ago. It's not that same vaunted rushing attack, and I think the strength of Nebraska's defense is stopping the run. We didn't necessarily see that last week. I think they have a huge get-right opportunity, but if Nebraska's defense can make Illinois' offense one-dimensional, you really extend the runway for Dylan Raiola in a game like this where I think he is going to be really, truly tested that, you know what, if you make a mistake, your defense has got you. And, hey, if it takes you a half to settle in and figure out what Illinois is doing defensively, if you have to go back to the locker room and check the film with Satterfield, have a little sit-down one-on-one and see what's going on that's confusing you, you have the time to do that. I think Nebraska is going to have that luxury this game because I think that despite what we saw last week, I've seen enough of a sample size across a season and a half to think Nebraska's rushing defense will be fine. And Illinois is not a vaunted rushing attack like we've come to expect in years past. Yes, they're going to pound the rock, but it's not in the same way we've seen from previous Bielema teams. And I think that really gives Raiola a chance to settle into this one and get things figured out as it goes on, but it might lead the game to be lower scoring than some people expect.
Bill, you look at Jamari Butler as a spark. That'll be big. He's an emotional guy. That's a huge advantage for this defense. You also look at the factor this defense can breathe this season because they do have an offense that can, dare I say, complement them and get some points, get some leads, take a few minutes off the clock with a drive or hit a big play. I mean, it's not just a one-armed fight for this football team with the defense.
Well, Jamari Butler is going to play. He didn't play last week against Northern Iowa, could have, but they sat him to get him healthy for this one. And he made a lot of money for himself in the Colorado game. And I would imagine that he is going to be in pursuit of Altmaier, who runs around a lot. More than Shedeur Sanders ran around a lot. Not that he had time to run. So I would think Jamari Butler is going to have a big game. The key for Nebraska is to get the pass rush to make him uncomfortable. And Altmaier's passes, in watching that KU game and a little bit of the Eastern Illinois game, which really isn't much of a litmus test, but you see his numbers are like 8 for 9, 9 for 11, 10 for 12. A lot of his passes are really short. I mean, it's like 5 yards, or to the flat. And then he'll uncork one every now and then to those two receivers I mentioned earlier, Franklin and Bryant. And Franklin made an incredible catch in the Kansas game with one hand while one arm was being pulled. So they're big play guys, but for the most part, that passing attack is not exactly as much of an attack as it is long handoffs vertically. But if Nebraska puts pressure on him, it's not really going to matter what those two guys on the outside do downfield because he's not going to have time to throw. And Nebraska is going to be fresh. They're going to rotate guys in. There's plenty of guys who've gotten snaps. And, Robinson and Hutmaker are going to hold down the fort along the line.
If I'm being completely honest here with the totality of this game, I think Nebraska has the advantage in mano-y-mano. I'm talking Nebraska's O-line against defensive line Nebraska's quarterback play against the secondary. Like, the only places I see Illinois may have an advantage, first off, their secondary against Nebraska's wide receivers. I still need to see something from Nebraska's wide receivers to make a play, as opposed to Dylan Raiola being the guy making the plays in the passing game. And that's not a bad place to be, first off. Let's lay that out. If your quarterback is the one making the plays, that's okay. You haven't seen some of those weapons step up like you expect. And I'm particularly referring to a guy in Jalen Lloyd that's got take the top off the defense ability. Haven't quite seen that in its full form yet this year. I'm talking Jamal Banks as a jump ball, go get a fade route in the end zone, or you know what, it's 3rd and long. You get single coverage on the outside, go make a play on the outside. I know he had that great catch against UTEP, but small sample size. Like, I see an advantage there. I see an advantage with Illinois and the special teams, especially kicking the football. They have a good place kicker that could be an advantage. And then the last thing I look at is their ability to generate takeaways as a defense, which that kind of is getting back to what I say with their secondary having the advantage on Nebraska's wide receivers. But in totality, I think Nebraska checks a lot of boxes in the on-paper matchup just in terms of where they have advantages.
Yeah, the defensive backfield, looking at what Illinois does. So Illinois last year was a primarily man defense in the back end. They do a really good job of disguising coverages. I think Aaron Henry, he's only in his 2nd year, and he's been with Bielema for a while. He's turned into a really good defensive coordinator. They disguise coverages, so they will shift between man and zone. And what the biggest thing will happen with Raiola, and this is where Dylan, I think, has poise, where he processes things really quick. I think he's going to have to be really, really good at the snap. I think pre-snap, they will show him some false stuff. I think you'll see Nebraska try and help Raiola out. I wouldn't be surprised if they use a lot of motion on Nebraska pre-snap to try and get Illinois to tell the truth on what they're going to do. And the one thing that will help in this way, and people are like, he's a freshman, he's going against his defense. And again, they're really good in the back end. They got a really good safety, and they got a really good cornerback, is they will mix things up where it's, is that zone, is that man? Thing that will help Nebraska and how they will deal with this, Nebraska does a very good job of getting the play in early. So in the headset, which shuts off at 15, Nebraska's getting in the full play by the 18-second mark on the play clock. So they're up to the line of scrimmage, and if Raiola sees something he doesn't like, he's got time to change up, or they can run motion to try and get Illinois to show you what they're going to do. So that's a little cat and mouse game to watch on Friday night to see what the back end does to try and throw Raiola off. But I'm telling you guys, he made a play on Saturday night against Northern Iowa where he got to his 3rd look. But if you look at the stripe on his helmet, he's got the eyes of the cornerback on his right, and he's looking. So the cornerback is like, that's where he's going. I'm going to start to inch up. And then all of a sudden, he snapped his head, went left, and completed a pass. He's not a freshman quarterback.
No, not playing and not prepping like one. That's Gary Sharp, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt, the Average Joe Sports Show, episode 55, previewing the Fighting Illini. And we ask you to like and subscribe on YouTube, the Average Joe Sports Show, the AJ Sports Pod on Twitter, and Spotify and iTunes. Can like and subscribe, give us a rating, tell a buddy. We're talking some Big Red, Illinois, 400th sellout. We're going to go around and talk first game memories in a moment. What do you want to say, Elijah?
Well, I just want to ask the question because, Gary, the point he just made, Dylan Raiola not playing like a freshman, is this the game that you think with the vaunted Illinois secondary, if we're going to call it that? I'm prepared to call it that with their turnover numbers so far this year. I think we've seen enough from Raiola this year to show as a freshman he has a really, really high floor. A floor that is above a lot of ceilings for true freshman quarterbacks. I've seen enough that I will say that with confidence. His floor is extremely high for a freshman. Is this the game where we get a sense of what his ceiling can be as a freshman?
So you go out and go 25 or 30 for 300? Yeah. I mean, maybe.
I don't know. I think that's a fair question, but I think this is a game where, man, Nebraska runs the football.
Yeah.
And he may not throw it a lot. He threw it 26 times Saturday, and they only ran it 22. They only had 48 plays. I don't know. I think they'll run it a little bit more, but it could be his numbers look really, really good. I think there's a couple of things I'd like to see him do better. When they run those deep crossers, He has a tendency to underthrow him, but I will tell you where he's got a shot, Nebraska does, because of their play calling with Thomas and Satterfield together. They can just kill teams in the middle of the field. They ran a play early against Northern Iowa, and it's a very simple play, but it shows you when you have a quarterback that can layer throws. They had Banks take off on a 9 route, which is just a straight, you're running a 100-yard dash down the field. So it took his man because it was in man coverage, and then it brought a safety because they're like, oh, my God, that guy got out of the blocks, beat his man off the line of scrimmage. That's where they're going. It opened up the middle of the field, and he hit Nelson in the middle of the field. I think that's where this still feels like a game. Instead of the big boy shots, they still control the middle of the field.
Here's what I think about Nebraska's run game. Watching the Kansas game, Daniels, they ran some option. He's a threat to run, very athletic. Dylan, not so much. But I think you might have a couple of those where they focus in on whether it's Johnson or Dowdell or Irvin. They focus on the backs, and maybe you get a couple of those 10, 15-yard, glider runs that you see Raiola get. He had one of the earlier games this season. But there's no threat, and Illinois is not going to be threatened by the quarterback in the run game. There were times where Kansas was gashing that defensive line for 7-8 yards a pop. So they appear to be somewhat vulnerable to that end. A couple other things about Nebraska's offense, and last week we talked about, or maybe it was Sunday, Nebraska's receivers needing to be a little more aggressive in the block. I think they need to be more aggressive this week in their route running. I think they need to be they need to be aggressive and crisp in getting open. Do they need to be a part of the running game? Absolutely. Do they need to beat up those defensive backs? Absolutely, and get open that way. But I think those routes by Nair and Banks and Barney or Lloyd, especially Banks and Nair, they have to play like big veteran wide receivers who want to make money at the next level. Mm-hmm. The route running has got to be aggressive at those safeties, the corners, and make them bite and then go beat them. Not just run your route and hope, Dylan gets it in the area and then you go make a play. The play begins at the snap. So I'm looking for aggressive, get open route running by those receivers. And Gary, you mentioned, the helmet communication. Illinois, and this was pointed out in the broadcast, that they used to be more of an up-tempo offense, but because of the helmet communication, they've slowed things down just a little bit and might huddle up a little bit more than they have in the last couple of years. I think if you're in that pattern after 3 games where you slow down your offense and you take it beyond the 15-second mark, you're in a world of hurt with a Friday night crowd in Lincoln that's going to be near 90,000. They played a sellout game at home last week in front of 60. And if they rely on the helmet communication to get the plays in and to slow the game down and think that the crowd's not going to be a factor, 15 seconds to snap, I think they're going to be sadly mistaken. So they may have to get into a rhythm offensively that they're not comfortable with yet at this point with this team this season. Maybe they can get back into a little more hurry up, and that they can communicate with Altmaier up to the 15-second mark. But I think that's going to be an adjustment for them to understand this isn't the home crowd of 60. It's Friday night in Lincoln in front of 90.
Yep. Atmosphere means everything. It's going to be, I don't know if it's going to be Colorado juice, but it's going to be loud and proud and a whole new experience. You've got a lot of pats on the back, Husker Nation. You deserve it. Fans and the student section getting called out in a great way as one of the top student sections in the country, and everyone's feeling great. That's incredible. It is the 400th sellout. I remember back to the 300th. I remember sitting with my cousin who was wearing that damn buffalo head as he was a third-year freshman at Colorado when the Buffs came to town with Cordell for the 200th. We're going to play a quick game of Remember When. Sorry, but it is the 400th. So, Dole, what was your first game?
My first Husker football game.
First, yeah. Which part of the sellout were you in?
I don't know, but they probably wish I hadn't been there. My first game. Look, I only went to like 5 games at Memorial Stadium before coming to college. We couldn't afford the ticket, so I grew up on Lyle Bremser and company.
That's all right.
I think the first game that I saw at Memorial Stadium was Tom Osborne's first loss, 13-12 to Missouri.
Oh no.
Yeah, I never told anybody that. I never wanted Tom to know because I think, maybe he would have asked me not to host his show. But I saw Tom's first loss as my first game. I also saw the throwing Simone Jack Thompson come to town and beat Nebraska. So basically, and I think was there a tie with Oklahoma State one year? And so I think like my 5 games or so were like, my 5 or 6, maybe it might have been 6. I think I saw Mike Rozier go for 285 against Kansas. I think I was 3-2-1 in my games at Memorial Stadium.
Wow, Bill Doleman. Now we know. Sharpie, how about you?
Edit that out.
So when I was growing up, my parents were Iowa season ticket holders, so I spent a lot of time over in Kinnick Stadium. But I was always I became a Nebraska football fan because the Des Moines Register at the time, on Sundays, they would call it the Big Peach. And it stood out because the section was orange. So when you went to get the paper, you could grab the sports section right away. You didn't have to rifle through the paper. And they would always send a reporter to cover Nebraska football games. And so you'd have the Iowa game, the Iowa State game on the front page, and then you'd have Nebraska. And so I followed Nebraska, and I was like, man, this is fun. They're very successful. But I had no connection to Omaha or Lincoln. But my mom in 1989, she said, do you want to go to a game? And I said, yeah. So, it was difficult getting tickets. And she surprised me as an early birthday present in 89. My first Nebraska game was November 11, 1989. I remember almost everything about it. Nebraska blew out KU. Ken Clark had a monster game. Jerry Godowski was fantastic. And, Nebraska, I think they won 51-14. And I will never forget that first time that I was ever in Memorial Stadium. But even more so is when you go to Memorial Stadium and the anticipation, and back then it was only 76,000. There wasn't the new press box. There wasn't the suites. There wasn't the East Stadium like it is. But walking up the ramp, when you came out of the vomitory, which is the opening into the stadium, I mean, I was hooked. I was like, my God, this is awesome. And then the whole stadium was red. Nebraska was rolling. Bruce Pickens, picked off a pass. And I was like, man, I love that guy. It was just, I'll never forget it. And I think the one thing about what all 4 of us can share about our first game there, you don't meet many Nebraskans who don't have a story like us about their first game there. Mm-hmm. Whether their mom and dad took them, their grandparents took them, the neighbor took them, or when they took their kids to the first game. It's the only show in town for Division I football in this state. It's special for a reason, and you can nitpick it getting to 400. You're fair to do that. But, man, that place for every single Nebraskan is a special place. And, heck, we only spend 8 Saturdays there a year, and we're only in the stadium for like 4 hours. But it has a place in people's life in this state and in this fan base that makes it so unique.
Amen, man. That's what it is. It's family, it's loved ones, it's memories created. I mean, it's lifelong memories that are going to be taken with you. Yeah. And 87 Arizona State, I think, was 87. Because I think maybe it was either Arizona State or UCLA. But that was it. Then I felt like a big boy when I finally got to go to my first Oklahoma game, which was Calvin Jones in 91. But those are a handful of them. Oklahoma State, Barry in 88. So those are kind of my short list. But 87 was when the booger eater didn't get left at home. So I could go with Dad in the Oldsmobile, and it was awesome. It was great. Elijah?
Yes, I won't forget 2005 Texas Tech. It was a Nebraska loss, unfortunately. Yeah, it was a brutal way. As a 6-year-old, though, I will say the result mattered a little bit less than the experience.
You're wise beyond your years, but you're young, brother. when I was 6 in 05 with LaKeven, it's like some of us were freaking crushing vowels in the press box.
I'm gonna make you feel older here in a second, so just give me a second. But
let me qualify mine with the first game I ever did watch was the game of the century in '71. So that's the first game I ever watched. First game I ever went to was in Manhattan, Kansas, to watch them because those were easy tickets to get. But then, my first game at Memorial Stadium was an inauspicious beginning. But I'm like Gary. I felt like Ned Beatty and Rudy saying, "'Tis the most beautiful sight these eyes have ever seen."
And and the thing about like what we all do now, I try, and I know you three do as well. You never try and take for granted a football Saturday in Lincoln. No. And I will say about this year is it feels different. It feels like kind of how it used to feel. The stadium is packed well before kickoff. The students are there. People are engaged. Outside, man, the area around the stadium is packed. I mean, to celebrate in this year your 400th and you start 3-0 and you have 3 crowds where no one can go, well, let's see, the students aren't here. I mean, there are no empty pockets of seats for 3 games that give you the opener, Colorado, and then for an FCS opponent, there wasn't an empty seat in the house Saturday night. Mm-hmm. I think that's very telling of where Nebraska football, the vibe is right now. But the fact that people, that's what we do. We go to Memorial Stadium on Saturdays.
The one thing I always try to keep in mind on Husker football Saturdays, and it's the feeling I had, Gary, you talked about it, first walking up the ramp into Memorial Stadium. It was, you get up about halfway up the ramp and you start seeing the crowd. And for me, our seats were in North Stadium. We got in nice and early. Shout out to my dad. He never arrives anywhere late. He is a 30 minutes early type of guy. So we were there an hour before kick, and this is after we played catch down on the field with the track that is no longer there. Like we got in early. And I'll never forget that feeling of walking up the ramp and seeing the already almost full student section across the way in South Stadium and being like, the red was just more vivid than I'd ever seen on TV before. And I finally understood why they called it the Sea of Red, because it was just, you couldn't see an individual in the student section. You just saw red. And it was the most vibrant red I've ever seen. I always try to keep that in mind when I go see a packed and juiced Memorial Stadium of someone out there in the stadium. It's their first time seeing a Husker game. It's the first time seeing the crowd. And that is a feeling that I don't think will ever be replicated of just like, whoa, the Sea of Red is an absolutely different feeling. And who cares who won or lost the game? I was 6 years old. That's the feeling that sticks with me. That feeling of, holy cow, this is just one of the greatest experiences I've ever had being a part of the Sea of Red. And shout out briefly, if I remember correctly, I think those seats were a gift from a family friend, the Schleichs. They were longtime season ticket holders. They had their swanky seats down in the southeast end zone, that little club down there. I'm not sure, or the northeast? Or sorry, southeast or southwest? I can't remember.
Yeah.
But they also had extra tickets that they knew I was a football nut and I wanted to go, and they gave tickets to me and my dad and got to go see a Husker football game. So I do want to give that shout out briefly. But yeah, that's an unforgettable feeling, is that first moment of seeing the Sea of Red.
One of my who used to give tickets every now and then, the very few I went to, was my Uncle Art. And my Uncle Art lived to be about 105, and he started going to games back in the early 1920s, and up until whenever he passed away, he saw Nebraska play Newt Rockne and the Four Horsemen in Memorial Stadium in 1923, 1924. So he was there for that. And that, memory kind of faded as he got a little north of 100. But, he had some great memories of, was there when they beat Oklahoma after the Kennedy assassination, and, and saw the rise of Devaney, and was there for number 1 in a row.
That's awesome.
And 100, yeah.
I think, Elijah, you were not there, but were all 3 of us at the 9/11 game against Rice?
I don't think I was there for that one.
I was not.
It was in my professional career, it was one of the moments. Because because I was part of the broadcast back then, and that night in that stadium was unbelievable. I mean, it just, like there's another part of that Memorial Stadium being so special is we all, Bill just rattled off a moment. You did, Schmidt, about the Barry Sanders game. Elijah rattled off a moment. It's like we can rattle off a special play. We knew exactly where we were, what seat, or a place on the field. I wasn't around, but to hear people talk about the Kelly Phelps hit, and they can point to where the spot on the field was, or you hear people go, you know what? When Westerkamp caught the Hail Mary, I was in that end zone. And I was like, no, you weren't. You were walking back to your car.
Or you were walking to the bar.
Okay, here's one, though. Best individual performance, Nebraska or opposing team you've ever seen in Memorial Stadium?
Roy Helu, Missouri. I'll jump on the top.
Ricky Williams, Texas, 1998, snapped the win streak at 47.
I was
right there with Barry. Sorry, Barry and Ricky. I mean, Ricky won. That was what was not. Sorry, Bill.
I did see the triplets in '83 play Kansas, and Rozier went for 285. So for a kid to be able to see those three play, it's a little bit like I saw the Beatles play. But for him to go for 285 in that game, man, I'd have to think about individual performances that, Tim Rattay and Troy Edwards, in Frank's debut in 2000 or in 98, they went, I don't remember,
590. 590 yards passing.
Yeah.
God.
And I remember I did the Sellout show that year, and we were doing the pregame feature on the opponent, and Troy Edwards had a soundbite that we got from an affiliate down in Louisiana. He says, "Oh yeah, we can beat Nebraska," and we're like, "Oh yeah, whatever." And and he goes for this record-breaking performance with Tim Rattay. So that was amazing. Too many Oklahoma bad memories to forget. Keith Jackson making the catch right in front of me in '86. Should have made the tackle, but I didn't. But individual performances, boy, that's going back.
That 2010 Mizzou game stands out. I will throw one in there because I mean it's tough to single it down to one. 1994 against Oklahoma State. Tommy is still laid up with the blood clots, and Behringer got hurt in that game. His lung was leaking, so at halftime they did the X-rays. He couldn't come back. Lawrence Phillips was unbelievable in that game. He toted it 33 times for 221 yards, and Oklahoma State that day could not stop him.
I remember that because I was there with my family, and it's 9-6, and everyone's going bat bleep at halftime. And Nebraska wins 33-6, covers whatever. But yeah, LP goes off. And it's stretch right, stretch left, ISO, option. Doesn't matter. I mean, the guy's just his size, speed, and then and wiggle. All three. He could do all three. He was great at all three.
Man, he was.
That's a good call.
And I consider him the greatest running back ever at the University of Nebraska. And I was lucky enough to be able to see him up close in his career. I mean, when he got going downhill, you could not stop him. And he was the prototypical Nebraska I-back with breakaway speed, vision, cutback, power. And we all know how it ended, but he won the Heisman Trophy either on opening night in '95 in Stillwater or a week later in East Lansing.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I wasn't lucky enough to get to see him, but just from the highlights I see and what people say, not just the prototypical Husker running back, he was at least on the field what you wanted in a running back, full stop. That's a guy that would have succeeded and been incredible in a lot of offenses in America. I'd even go as far as say probably damn near every single offense in America. It's just a shame what happened outfield. I do want to say, though, with that 94 performance with Roy Helu, you also have to give a hat tip to the offensive lineman. That's the former fat kid in me coming to the forefront and saying, come on now. But, hey, the offensive line cleared those holes.
You know why? But why it's so hard for me to think of one individual performance is because saw a lot of wins over the time that I was in college, and then working professionally there, and there were so many great team performances, and so often, there were blowouts where it would be a combination of Turner Gill and Irving Fryer and Mike Rozier, or you would have Tommy Frazier or Eric Crouch, but then you'd have, great, good performance, but it was the offensive lines were always so good. And, Dave Remington was dominant. God, Dave Remington was the Big 8 offensive player of the year. Yeah. People said that well, yeah, Dave Remington, he was the center. He was a center and the offensive player of the year. So it's hard to say, well, there was that one game, that somebody had, because there was collectively Nebraska had such great team performances. You think maybe the defensive performance, Ndamukong Suh against Colorado was, he terrorized him and Cody Hawkins, that would probably go down as a defensive performance. But some amazing memories, that's for sure. Yeah. I'll tell you, my favorite place, really forever has always been when I did host the Osborne show in the 90s. I would go up to the camera well on top of the press box in the little tin shack that they built atop the enclosed facility, and I was supposed to sit inside, and I just didn't want to. Because I wanted to feel the air. I wanted to, hear the crowd. And it didn't matter if it was hot or if it was cold, if it was raining. I was out there, and it was just me and Brian Carpenter and Brian Monson, and, they were the film crew and, the phone guys or the LAS guys, and a couple, just 7 or 8 of us would watch the games up there. But to feel the atmosphere and to hear the crowd, and just was magnificent. It's still my best memories.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Hey, one more quick thing here, which is really kind of shows that there is no place like Nebraska. Volleyball tonight against Stanford, 327 straight sellout that they've had. It started in 01 at the Coliseum. Now they moved into the Devaney Center in 13. In the same week, you're going to celebrate the 400 sellout at Memorial Stadium. I mean, that's not normal to have two facilities and 2 programs that it's a tough ticket for the most part to get.
It makes me feel old here that we're at 400. not to derail the conversation. I mean, I remember 300 sellout. I remember you're playing the Raging Cajuns. It was on pay-per-view, and my dad said, hell no, we ain't paying for pay-per-view, and we went camping and listened on the radio instead. So that's how I got to listen to the 300 sellout.
That was I thought I could get anything in the world. The day I talked Mom and Dad into buying pay-per-view in 89 against Oklahoma, because guess what? OU and Okie State were put on double secret probation when they were taken off TV for 2 years.
Well, thank God pay-per-view isn't around anymore in college football.
I had to really, really grovel to, it's $25, but you can take part of my allowance. And I'm sure my dad ran, the VIG on me, ran juice on the outstanding payment, with what I owed, but it was good.
Well, okay, I told you really fast. I did tell you I was going to make you guys feel old, and this is where I was going with the 300th consecutive sellout. I was 10. My little sister, who is now a sophomore at UNL, does not remember the 300th consecutive sellout. Just to let that sink in. There are students at UNL that grew up, born and bred Husker fans that do not remember the 300th consecutive sellout. That's what made me feel old. Is I know I wasn't old. I was 10 years old, but she doesn't even remember the 300th consecutive sellout. And she wasn't a football fan, so that's maybe there's some unique students out there that do remember it, despite the fact that they were 5 or 6. But the current students at UNL don't even remember 300, which that can make you feel old real fast, because that was not that long ago.
I like the sign I like the sign that one of the students had, and I don't know if it was the Colorado game or the UNI game last week. One of the students has held up a sign that says, "This is the Nebraska football that my dad has always been talking about."
That was a great sign. That was so good. This is what the 90s. No, Junior's getting into it. My kid, and he got to go with my mom and dad from time to time, and Papa Al, when Michigan State's been in town, he'll go. But game I took him to is, I think, was Idaho State, and he's still pissed at me about it. It's like, that's the game you decide to take me to? All the teams that have rolled in, I get Idaho State, but He got to Colorado a couple
Hey,
weeks
you know,
ago.
it has changed. I mean, it's changed a little bit, but you remember, like, in your neighborhood, you know, Elijah was mentioning who he got tickets from in 05. Like, if somebody in your neighborhood had season tickets to Nebraska football, that was like a huge deal. Like, they were the coolest people on that block. And the day that their tickets arrived and they would show them off, and you're like, do you think they'll take me to a game?
Oh, that's
the day Dad's business jumped from 2 season tickets to 4, so the whole family could go was great.
I still remember
even looking at those tickets.
Yeah, it was no longer paper, rock, scissors between my mom, my brother, and me. She won all the time, by the way.
Right.
After the 2009 season, I won't forget. I was still at Maxey Elementary School at the time. I think I was either 4th or 5th grade because my brother wasn't with me. He was off to middle school. So I remember I got picked up, and sitting on the center console of my dad's truck was the season tickets for the year. This is right at the beginning of the school year. And he didn't tell me that he had applied for season tickets. He didn't tell me he got him. It was just get into the car or get into the truck after school, and there's a season ticket sitting on the center console. I'm like, oh, that's a big memory for me as well, as hopping in and it's the best day ever.
And Elijah promptly grabbed his lighter from his sock and just kidding, dude. Well, we'll hit
Illinois better not screw this up.
All right, it's about right. We got to get a prediction in for Nebraska-Illinois, but 2 seconds in, it is a interesting Big Ten slate this weekend. USC, Michigan, Rutgers, Virginia Tech. There's, Nebraska's schedule looks suddenly really interesting from a resume standpoint. If Nebraska keeps handling their business, again, not to jinx anything Friday night, before Columbus even gets here, right? With Rutgers possibly ranked, Illinois is ranked. You assume Indiana's not going to screw up. But, what do you think real quick here? Does Michigan bounce back, or do you even give a damn? It's a great helmet game.
As Fox has been promoting it, it is the biggest game in the Big Ten for USC.
Yeah, it's fair.
It's their 4th game, or it's their 4th week that they're playing in the Big Ten. This is a huge game for Lincoln Riley. I mean, this is a big weekend for Lincoln Riley and Brent Venables. Ironically, yes. Oklahoma is, there's like a connection. By the way, Heupel got fired as the OC at OU by Bob Stoops, who hired Lincoln Riley. Now Heupel comes back to Norman against Venables as the head coach of Tennessee, and they're, scoring 100 points a game. But back to USC. I think USC is probably one of those teams that we've changed our opinion for the better. Mm-hmm. Them and maybe Indiana if you're not into Fleck Light, Signetti at Indiana. But it was always going to be USC.
Soprano Fleck.
I mean, Signetti's a winner, and it could be 6-0 against 6-0 in the middle of October in Bloomington. But about USC, it was always about the D. Could they fix the defense? Because offensively, they're going to put up points. And if you know Lincoln Riley, Moss is going to be a elite quarterback. All of a sudden, that defense looks much improved. They just got a big recruiting pickup. USC might be inching back to the USC that we think just because they're better on D. I think they go into Ann Arbor. And I think Michigan, it's not a quarterback issue at Michigan. It is, but I think it's a bigger wide receiver issue. They can't move the ball through the air. I think USC wins that game. And we go, okay, Lincoln Riley, you have my attention.
I also think USC wins that football game. I wouldn't be shocked to see a Michigan cover, to be 100% honest with you. I don't think Michigan is great this year, but there's 2 reasons I say that. One, yes, USC's defense looks much improved. Who have they played this year that likes running the football and can run the football well? There isn't one. LSU, you thought maybe? No, LSU can't run the football with great success. Michigan, that's their bread and butter. That's what they love doing. That's a different type of battle for a USC front 7 that is quick. They're rangy, they're long. They're not massive by any means. Could be advantage Michigan in that sense. I will say Michigan's passing attack is horrible. No matter who's going to be at quarterback, their wide receivers, their quarterback, it is not good. They might have to run for 250 yards against USC if they want to win that football game. That's going to be a tough task. But the other thing I will say about Michigan is that's a team that came into the year expecting to be competing for a college football playoff. After a loss to Texas, if you lose to USC at home, it becomes a case of you have to beat Ohio State. You pretty much have to win out, and you have to beat Ohio State on the day after Black Friday to achieve the goals that you want for the season. Yeah. That's a big deal. A team playing with their back against the wall. I still think USC is the better football team here, but I think it's going to be interesting both stylistically and from a motivation point of view for that Michigan football team. It might be a closer game than people expect.
I think I think Michigan's going through national championship hangover, freshman head football coach Sharon Moore, new quarterback. There's just so many dynamics at play with that. That to think that they're going to come back after losing Harbaugh and McCarthy and a first time head coach, I just think that was a big ask to think that they were going to come right back and be a national championship contender. Not that I think a lot of people thought they would be. They had the win over, Fresno State in the opener, 31-10. It was okay. I thought Texas exposed them and probably could have exposed them a little bit more. If Ryan Day doesn't beat Michigan this year, oh my God. I think that we're in the other conference. I think we have witnessed the birth of an instant SEC rivalry. As long as Heupel and Venables are at Oklahoma and Tennessee, there's just something. I think that's a circle of the calendar game for people to really be interested in. I know Oklahoma and Texas are still there in the ultimate rivalry, but boy, Tennessee, just seeing those two teams together on the same field is going to be kind of iconic. But I think that could be I think that could be a long-lasting thing. And if Tennessee does what they've been doing, and I think Oklahoma might be vulnerable, not like I think Michigan is, but if they win that game, the pressure is going to be on Venables to match the next time they meet. I'm really intrigued by that one. I think that's fun.
I think that's game of the day, and I can't be right on both of them. I kind of like the underdog Oklahoma in that game as well for two reasons. Again, you got a young quarterback for Tennessee. Venables is great at scheming up things defensively, and where Tennessee has made things really easy on their young quarterback, Nico, not going to try his last name, is they've run the ball for, over 300 yards a game every single game, I think. They've been running the hell out of the ball. That is the strength of Oklahoma's defense. They're going to try to take that away and put the game on Nico's shoulders. I think that might be advantage Oklahoma. Again, not saying they win, but I like kind of if you're betting on underdogs to cover, I kind of like both Michigan and Oklahoma. I'm guaranteed to be wrong on one of those because that's just how it goes, but one of those I will be right. So I'm hedging my bets here and saying I like Oklahoma +7 in that one as well. And it might get up to 7.5. That's right. If it gets up to 7.5, I might have to go put my money where my mouth is.
So Michigan could be 2-2 heading into October and blown out twice at home, which is just nuts. And then Venables, half of Sooner Nation ain't sold on the guy anyway as a head coach. Hell of a defensive coordinator. But you had different, you had family gatherings around the holidays that were, wasn't the presidential race they were arguing. It was, should Venables be the guy? So we'll see. As we wrap up, fellas, let's talk Nebraska and Illinois. Can we settle on 9? Is that all right? 9 the number?
High. Is it? I thought that number had dropped within the past couple days.
Now it's 7.5. That thing's gone from 10.5 to 8.5 to 9 to 9.5 down to 7.5. It's down to 7.5. So a touchdown and the hook. I think it's close. I think Nebraska exercises another demon. It's another mile marker. And I think they sweat a little bit, but it's a good sweat, right? The dreaded workout. And give me the Huskers 27-20. 20 is a tough number, but I think there's a turnover that gets Illinois close to 20, but the Big Red get it done.
I think it's going to be like the Colorado game. I think it's going to be probably a similar score, like 92-4. But I think it's going to be a game where you look at it, and I think that defense is going to be emotionally ready to play.
Okay.
I think that's the whole key to it. They've not faced anything like Nebraska's front, whatever they want to throw at them. Front 3, front 6. I think the pursuit is going to be dogged on Altmaier. And I was not confident in Nebraska's secondary against Horn and Hunter, and they shut them down. in part because those guys pursued Sanders so well. So I think that they pursue Altmaier. I think it's going to be tough despite how big and good I think those receivers are. I think Nebraska may not put up a lot of points, but I think in the end it'll be like, yeah, that was kind of a decisive game like the Colorado game was.
The thing, Tony White's defense, only one team in Memorial Stadium, and I know it's not a huge sample size, but only one team in Memorial Stadium has scored more than 14, and that was when Michigan rolled in and put up 45, and we know what that Michigan team did. I see this as a 24-14 game. Okay. I think it's a good Big Ten game, but I don't think Nebraska will put themselves in harm's way where it's attention convention. Remember, they didn't trail last year. I mean, they controlled that game, and Nebraska wasn't crisp last year, and they still won 20-7. But I see a 24-14, pretty methodical game where there's some interest in the fourth quarter. It's not fully boring, but it's just another step in changing the narrative that Nebraska has moved out of the Illinois neighborhood, and they're starting to move up where you expect to win those type of games now, and you don't think, well, could they? I just think they celebrate in front of the 400 sellout in a place that will be rocking, and on TV will look great. And another thing, guys, if Nebraska looks good, and of course if Raiola plays well, think about it. It's a standalone game. I think it'll do $3 million on Fox. Saturday morning, ESPN and Fox, they will have watched that game. They're already talking about Nebraska. It could be a love fest on Saturday for Nebraska football.
Nice.
Now,
Elijah, what do you got?
I'll lead up the rear here. I don't think Illinois' offense is good enough to really, truly threaten this Husker defense, especially if they're forced to drive the length of the field. I think the turnovers are the wild card here, especially if it's a wet weather game. The forecast right now appears to be dry, which I think means I'm not as concerned about turnovers as I would be if it was rainy. Therefore, I think when Illinois has the ball, they're going to be driving the length of the field. I don't think they have much success against a Husker defense if they have to drive the length of the field. And I think Dylan Raiola figures out that Illinois secondary, and they don't put too much onto his plate. Another efficient game. Give me Nebraska 28 and Illinois 17. Illinois does break that 14-point threshold, but it's still a pretty convincing and comfortable win for Nebraska at the end of the day.
I think Nebraska handles Illinois like the volleyball team handled Stanford.
Yeah.
Okay. There it is. Episode 55 of the Average Joe Sports Show. Like and subscribe on YouTube, and find us on Spotify and iTunes. And as always on Twitter, the AJ Sports Pod. Bill Doleman, Gary Sharp, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt talk to you Sunday morning, 10:30 on the Average Joe Sports Show.